They said Alpha King Damon Blackwood didn't have a heart. They said the billionaire tycoon was a machine, built only for war and profit. He had rejected every high-born she-wolf in the country, claiming a mate would only make him weak. But that was before he walked into a rundown diner on a rainy Tuesday in November. That was before he met Ivy, a rejected omega scrubbing floors for minimum wage, smelling like bleach and sorrow. He didn't just want her. When he saw the bruises on her arm, the king didn't just claim a mate, he started a war. This is the story of how the cold king burned the world down for the girl nobody wanted. The rain in Seattle didn't wash things clean. It just made the grime on the sidewalk slicker. For Ivy Caldwell, the rain was just another hole in her worn-out sneakers. It was November 14th. Ivy knew the date because it was exactly 1 year since her parents had died in a car accident on I-5, leaving her with nothing but debt and a latent wolf spirit that refused to manifest properly. In the hierarchy of the shifters, she was worse than a human. She was a dormant, an omega, with no shifting ability, no status, and no protection. Ivy pushed the mop bucket across the checkerboard floor of Sal's diner. The water was grey, much like her future. At 19, she should have been in college or finding a mate within the local Blue Ridge pack. Instead, she was working 2 jobs to pay off the medical bills her stepfather, a gambling addict named Frank, had left behind before skipping town. "Miss Caldwell, you missed a spot near booth 4, the manager, Mr. Henderson, barked from behind the counter. He was a balding human who didn't know about wolves, but he knew how to be cruel. "If you want that overtime pay, I suggest you put some muscle into it." "Yes, Mr. Henderson," Ivy whispered, keeping her head down. Her brown hair was tied back in a messy bun, strands escaping to stick to her sweaty forehead. Her uniform was a size too big, hiding a frame that was too thin from skipping meals to save for rent. She lived in a studio apartment above a garage on 4th Street that smelled perpetually of gasoline and damp drywall. The bell above the diner door jingled. The air pressure in the room dropped instantly. It wasn't just a customer. It was a predator. Ivy felt it before she saw him. The tiny hairs on her arms stood up. Every instinct in her dormant wolf screamed. Subsidize, hide, threat. 3 men walked in. They wore Italian suits that cost more than Ivy would make in 10 years. The 2 flanking men were huge, built like linebackers, scanning the room with tactical precision. But the man in the middle, he sucked all the oxygen out of the room. Damon Blackwood. Even humans knew the name. He was the CEO of Blackwood Enterprises, a real estate conglomerate that owned half the skyline. But to the wolves, he was the alpha king of the West Coast. He was 28, rumored to be a trillionaire, and famously ruthless. He had dismantled the northern packs 2 years ago, simply because they trespassed on his territory. He sat at the corner booth, booth 4, the very booth Ivy was cleaning. Ivy froze, clutching the mop handle. She should run to the kitchen. An omega like her, smelling of bleach and old grease, had no business being this close to an alpha of his caliber. "Coffee. Black," Damon said. His voice was a low rumble, like a luxury car idling. He didn't look at the menu. He didn't look at the waitress. He was looking at his phone, typing a furious email. "Right away, sir," Mr. Henderson said, practically tripping over himself to serve the billionaire. He shoved Ivy aside with his elbow. "Get to the kitchen, Ivy. Don't disturb the customers." Ivy stumbled, her sneaker catching on the wet floor. She flailed, her hand slapping onto the sticky table of booth 4 to steady herself. Slap. Silence descended on the diner. Ivy's breath hitched. Her hand was inches from Damon Blackwood's pristine cuff. Slowly, terrified, she looked up. Damon stopped typing. He turned his head. His eyes were the color of storm clouds, grey, turbulent, and cold. He looked at her hand on the table, then travelled up her arm, past the frayed sleeve of her uniform, to her face. For a second, Ivy saw a flicker of something in his eyes. Confusion? Anger? "I'm sorry," she gasped, pulling her hand back as if burned. "I'm so sorry, Alpha. Sir." Damon didn't speak. He flared his nostrils slightly, inhaling. Then he looked away, dismissing her entirely. "The table is wet," he said to his bodyguard, his voice devoid of emotion. "We're leaving." He stood up, buttoning his suit jacket. "This place is filthy." Ivy felt the shame burn her cheeks like acid. She shrank back against the wall as the king and his entourage swept out of the diner, leaving a $100 bill on the table for a coffee he never drank. Mr. Henderson turned on her, his face purple. "You clumsy idiot. Do you know who that was? You're fired. Get your things and get out." Ivy didn't argue. She couldn't. She untied her apron, tears stinging her eyes, and walked out into the rain. She had lost her job. She had $3 in her pocket, and the Alpha King thought she was filth, but she didn't see the black SUV idling down the block. She didn't see Damon Blackwood sitting in the back seat, gripping his chest, his wolf howling inside his mind, clawing at the cage of his control. Damon Blackwood growled, a sound that made his driver, a beta named Marcus, flinch. "Sir?" Marcus asked, eyeing the rearview mirror. "Are you all right? Do we need to go to the hospital?" "Drive," Damon snarled, loosening his tie. "Just drive." The interior of the Maybach was climate-controlled, but Damon felt like he was burning alive. The moment that girl, that scrawny, terrified waitress, had touched the table, the air had filled with a scent that hit him like a physical blow. It wasn't flowers or vanilla, the way poets described mates. It smelled like rain on scorching pavement. Like ozone. Like home. "It's not possible," Damon muttered to himself, pouring a glass of whiskey from the car's decanter. His hand shook. He was the cold king. He had made a vow at 21, after his father was murdered by a rival pack using a female spy, that he would never take a mate. Mates were a weakness. They could be leveraged, tortured, used against you. He had taken suppressants for years to dull his mating drive. But that girl... "Marcus," Damon said, his voice regaining its icy composure. "The girl at the diner. The waitress, sir. Find out who she is. I want a full dossier. Name, address, bloodline, debts. Everything. Consider it done, Alpha. Are we going to the penthouse?" "No," Damon said, looking out the window at the grey city blurring by. "Go back to the office. I need to distract my wolf before he tears this car apart." 3 days later, Ivy was sitting on the floor of her apartment, staring at an eviction notice. The text on the paper was red and final. "Pay $200 by Friday, or vacate the premises." "I can't do this," she whispered to the empty room. She hugged her knees. She had applied to 3 other restaurants, but no one was hiring until after the holidays. Her phone buzzed. It was a text from her only friend, Sarah, a beta who worked at a high-end club called the Velvet Room. "Sarah, Ivy, emergency. One of the coat check girls got sick. Can you fill in tonight? It's a gala for the pack leaders. Tips are insane. You could make rent in one night." Ivy didn't hesitate. "I'm on my way," she texted back. The Velvet Room was located in the downtown financial district. It was neutral ground, a place where business was conducted between the human world and the wolf world. Ivy arrived at 7 p.m. Sarah shoved a uniform into her hands, a sleek black dress that was much nicer than her diner rags, though it was tight in the chest and loose in the hips. "Just take the coats, give them a ticket, and keep your head down," Sarah instructed. "And whatever you do, Don't look the alphas in the eye. The tension is high tonight. The treaty negotiations are stalling. Ivy nodded, taking her station behind the mahogany counter. For 2 hours it was a blur of fur coats, cashmere scarves, and the overpowering scent of rich, arrogant wolves. She kept her eyes on the floor, smiling politely, taking tips. She had almost $300 in her jar. She just needed a little more. At 9:30 p.m., the double doors swung open. The room went silent. Damon Blackwood walked in. He looked even more terrifying in a tuxedo. His black hair was slicked back, his jawline sharp enough to cut glass. He wasn't alone. Hanging on his arm was Jessica Vane. Ivy's stomach dropped. Jessica was the daughter of the alpha of the Southern Pack. She was stunning, tall, blonde, radiating power and confidence. She was everything Ivy wasn't. Rumors had been swirling in the tabloids that their packs were looking to merge for business reasons. Damon looked bored. He handed his coat to the attendant next to Ivy without glancing at him. But then Jessica laughed, a high, tinkling sound, and handed her white mink coat to Ivy. "Careful with that," Jessica sneered, her eyes narrowing as she assessed Ivy. "It costs more than your life." Ivy took the heavy coat. "Yes, ma'am." As Ivy reached for the coat, her fingers grazed Jessica's hand. Jessica recoiled as if she'd touched slime. "You!" Jessica shrieked, drawing the attention of the entire lobby. "This Omega is filthy. She smells like old grease and fear. Damon, why do they let stray dogs work here?" Ivy froze. The insult cut deep, but she was used to it. She lowered her head. "I apologize, Luna." "I'm not your Luna yet," Jessica snapped. She grabbed a glass of red wine from a passing waiter's tray. "You need to be taught a lesson in hygiene." Before Ivy could move, Jessica splashed the red wine forward. It didn't hit Ivy. A hand, large, tanned, and incredibly fast, shot out and caught Jessica's wrist in a crushing grip. The wine sloshed over the rim, staining the floor. But not a drop touched Ivy. The lobby gasped. Damon Blackwood was holding Jessica's wrist, but he wasn't looking at her. He was staring straight at Ivy. His pupils were blown wide, swallowing the grey of his irises. His chest was heaving. "Damon!" Jessica whimpered, trying to pull her hand back. "You're hurting me." Damon released her with a shove, causing her to stumble back in her heels. He didn't care. He took a step toward the counter, toward Ivy. The scent was back, stronger, overpowering. It drowned out the expensive perfume, the wine, the crowd. Ivy backed up until she hit the wall of coat racks. She was trembling. The most powerful man on the West Coast was looking at her like she was the only water in a desert. "You," Damon rasped. His voice was different this time. It wasn't the cold CEO, it was the wolf. He bypassed the counter, ripping the hinged door off its latches as if it were made of paper. He stalked into the small coat check booth. The security guards moved to intervene, but Damon let out a low, vibrating growl that froze every shifter in the room. It was a command. "Stay back." He cornered Ivy against the furs. He towered over her, boxing her in with his arms on either side of her head. He leaned down, burying his face in the crook of her neck, inhaling deeply. Ivy stopped breathing. She could feel the heat radiating off him. "Mine," he whispered against her skin, the word sending a shiver down her spine that felt like lightning. He pulled back slightly, his hand coming up to cup her jaw. His thumb traced her bottom lip. "Who hurt you?" he demanded, his thumb brushing a faint yellow bruise on her cheekbone from where she'd bumped into a cabinet days ago. Nobody," Ivy stammered. "Please, Alpha, I'll get fired." "You don't work here anymore," Damon said, his eyes burning with a possessive madness. "Damon!" Jessica shrieked from the lobby, humiliated. "What are you doing with that trash?" Damon turned his head slowly to look at Jessica. His face was a mask of deadly calm. "Careful, Jessica," Damon said, his voice carrying through the silent hall. "You are speaking to my mate." Chaos erupted. The silence inside the Bentley limousine was heavier than the lead-lined doors that sealed them in. Outside, the chaos of the velvet room was fading. The shouting paparazzi, the stunned socialites, the screeching insults of Jessica Vane. Inside, the air was thick with an intoxicating blend of Damon's aggressive cedarwood scent and Ivy's own terrified aroma of rain and ozone. Ivy Caldwell sat pressed against the far door, as far away from the Alpha King as the confined space allowed. She was still wearing the ridiculous coat-check uniform, now stained with a splash of red wine that had missed her, but caught the hem of her dress. Damon occupied the other side of the leather bench seat. He wasn't looking at her. His jaw was clenched so tight, a muscle feathered violently in his cheek. His large hands rested on his knees, knuckles white. He was a statue of restraint. But Ivy could feel the heat rolling off him in waves. His wolf was right beneath the surface, furious at the way she had been treated, desperately wanting to soothe her, mark her, claim her completely. "Where are you taking me?" Ivy whispered. Her voice sounded thin and brittle, like dry leaves. Damon didn't answer immediately. He took a slow, measured breath, fighting for control. If he spoke too quickly, he knew he would roar. "Safety," he finally grated out. His voice was deeper than before, vibrating through the floorboards of the car. "I need to go home," Ivy said, gaining a shred of courage. "My landlord will lock me out if I'm late with the rent money I made tonight." Damon slowly turned his head. Those storm-grey eyes pinned her down. The intensity of his gaze felt like a physical weight on her chest. "You don't have a landlord anymore, Ivy," he said, pronouncing her name as if tasting a fine vintage for the first time. "That life is over. You won't be returning to that squalid apartment above the garage." Ivy's breath hitched. "How do you know where I live?" "I know everything about you, since the moment you touched my table 3 days ago," Damon admitted, his eyes darkening. "I know about your debts, your stepfather's gambling, the eviction notice." Ivy felt sick. Violation washed over her. He had investigated her like a faulty acquisition. "You had no right," she trembled. "And you had no right to say that thing back there. To Jessica." Damon's growl was low, barely audible, but it made the reinforced glass of the windows vibrate. "I spoke only the truth. You are my mate. My wolf recognized yours the second I saw your bruises in that diner. But you called me filthy," Ivy accused, tears finally spilling over. The memory stung more than Jessica's wine ever could. "You looked at me like I was garbage and walked away." The accusation hit its mark. Damon flinched. For the first time in years, the Cold King felt a stab of genuine regret. His wolf howled inside him, berating him for hurting their bonded one. He moved. It was too fast for Ivy to react. Suddenly, he was crowding her space, leaning over her. She pressed back against the door, squeezing her eyes shut, expecting violence. Instead, she felt a large, warm hand gently cup the side of her face. His thumb brushed away a tear. "I was a fool," Damon murmured, his voice husky with an emotion he couldn't name. He leaned in, inhaling the scent at her throat, his nose grazing her pulse point. Her heart was hammering like a trapped bird. "I was fighting it. I thought you were a weakness sent to destroy me. But when I saw her touch you tonight, I realized the only weakness I have is you. And I will burn this city to ash before I let anyone disrespect what is mine again." He pulled back slightly, his eyes searching hers. "You are not filthy, little rain cloud. You are the only clean thing I have ever smelled in this rotten city." The car slowed, turning onto a private ramp. They had arrived at Blackwood Tower, the steel and glass needle that pierced the Seattle skyline, his home, his fortress. They rode the private elevator in silence to the penthouse on the 60th floor. When the doors opened, Ivy stepped into a world she had only seen in magazines. It was vast, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the rain-slicked city lights. Everything was marble, chrome, and black leather. It was beautiful, cold, and empty. "Marcus has arranged clothes for you in the master suite," Damon said, shrugging off his tuxedo jacket and tossing it onto a chair. He sounded exhausted. "Food will be brought up. Eat, sleep. We will talk tomorrow when I am more controlled." Ivy looked around the cavernous space. It felt less like a home and more like a very expensive cage. "Am I a prisoner here, Alpha Blackwood?" she asked quietly. Damon paused halfway to the wet bar. He didn't turn around. "Until I am certain you won't run back to the gutter the moment I take my eyes off you?" "Yes, Ivy, you are." The sunrise over Seattle was usually grey, but from the 60th floor of Blackwood Tower, it looked like bruised purple and gold bleeding through the clouds. Ivy hadn't slept. She had spent the night sitting on the edge of a bed that was bigger than her entire apartment, wrapped in silk sheets that cost more than a year of her wages. She wore a cashmere robe she'd found in the closet, one that smelled faintly of lavender and was dozens of sizes too big for her malnourished frame. She felt different. The proximity to Damon all night, even though he had slept in another room down the hall, had done something to her dormant wolf. It felt like something was waking up inside her, stretching its limbs after a 19-year coma. Her senses were sharper. She could hear the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen down the hall. She could smell the coffee brewing before Marcus, Damon's beta assistant, even brought it in. At 8:00 a.m., the door to the penthouse opened. It wasn't Marcus with breakfast. It was Damon. He was already dressed in a charcoal suit, impeccably groomed, the cold mask back in place. But his eyes were weary, red-rimmed as if he hadn't slept either. He held a thick manila folder in his hand. He tossed it onto the marble coffee table in front of Ivy. It landed with a heavy thud. "We need to talk," Damon said, sitting in the armchair opposite her. He didn't offer her coffee. He looked at her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. "Can I leave now?" Ivy asked, pulling the robe tighter around herself. "I missed my shift at the diner. I'm definitely fired now." "Forget the diner," Damon snapped, his patience already fraying. "You need to look at that file." Ivy hesitated, then reached for the folder. She opened it. The first page was a copy of her birth certificate. Ivy Marie Caldwell, born November 14th. Mother, Sarah Caldwell. Father, Frank Caldwell. "I know my birthday," Ivy said, confused. "Look closer," Damon commanded. "Look at the hospital seals." Ivy squinted. The seals looked blurry, almost photocopied onto the original document. "They're forgeries," Damon said, his voice flat. "Excellent ones, but forgeries nonetheless. I had my best data analysts run your background last night. Frank and Sarah Caldwell were real people, yes, but they weren't your parents. They were low-level deltas who died 15 years ago, not last year in a car crash." Ivy felt the room spin. "What? That's a lie. I remember them. I lived with them my whole life, until the crash. The crash was real. The people who died in it were real. But they weren't the Caldwells. They were living under assumed identities, just like you have been." Damon leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. The predator gaze was back, but this time it wasn't directed at her, but at the mystery she represented. Why would two wolves live as humans for 19 years, raising a child in poverty, deeply in debt to human loan sharks, never once seeking aid from a pack? Damon asked rhetorically. Because they were hiding you. He flipped the file open to a grainy black-and-white photograph taken 20 years ago. It showed a group of stern-faced wolves standing in front of a burned-down lodge. "Have you ever heard of the Silver Moon Pack?" Damon asked. Ivy shook her head numbly. "No. They taught us in school they were wiped out in the territorial wars before I was born." "They were exterminated," Damon corrected grimly, "because they refused to bend the knee to the old Northern Alliance. They were ferocious warriors, known for a unique genetic trait. Their wolves were incredibly resilient to psychic attacks. They were strategists, yet they were slaughtered in one night, betrayed from within." He pointed a long finger at a woman standing in the back row of the photo. She was tall, with eyes that even in black and white looked fiercely intelligent. "That," Damon said, "was Evelyn Vance, the beta female of the Silver Moon Pack. She disappeared the night of the slaughter, presumed dead along with her mate, the beta male." Damon looked up from the photo, his grey eyes piercing Ivy's soul. "My analysts ran a facial recognition sequence against your employee photo from the diner. The bone structure is a 99.4% match, accounting for age." Ivy dropped the photo, as if it were on fire. "No, that's impossible. I'm nobody. I'm a Dormant Omega." "Are you?" Damon challenged softly. "Or was your wolf bound?" The Silver Moon Pack knew ancient blood magic. If they wanted to hide a child, the last heir to their beta line, they would bind her wolf so her scent wouldn't attract attention. They would place her with trusted guardians living as humans. They would bury her in poverty, so no one would look twice. He stood up and walked to the window, looking out at his city. "But the binding spell was tied to your maturity. It was meant to break when you found a suitable mate strong enough to protect you. When I touched you in that diner, I broke the seal." Ivy stood up, her legs shaking. "This is insane. You're making this up because you're ashamed you mated with a poor girl." Damon spun around, his eyes flashing dangerously. "Do not insult me. I don't care about your money. I care about the fact that the moment I claimed you publicly last night, chatter on the dark web spiked by 400%. He walked over to her, towering over her, his presence overwhelming. "People are asking who the mystery Omega is, and people who remember the Silver Moon Pack are starting to connect dots they shouldn't. You aren't just a rejected girl anymore, Ivy. You are a loose end from a 20-year-old massacre." Before Ivy could process the horror of his words, a low thump shook the penthouse. It wasn't loud, barely more than a vibration in the floor, but Damon went rigid. A second later, an alarm blared through the apartment, a harsh, rhythmic klaxon. Red emergency lights began to strobe along the ceiling. "What is that?" Ivy cried, backing away. Damon moved with blinding speed, grabbing her arm. His face was murderous. "We have a breach," he snarled. "Someone just blew the external locks on the private elevator." He dragged her toward a hidden panel in the wall, revealing a panic room filled with monitors and weapons. "Who?" Ivy gasped, stumbling after him. Damon pulled a heavy-looking silver handgun from the wall rack and checked the chamber. "Jessica's father, Alpha Vane of the Southern Pack, is angry about last night," Damon said coldly, handing her a smaller weapon she had no idea how to use. "But Vane wouldn't be stupid enough to attack my home directly unless he had backing, unless someone told him who you really are." He shoved her into the safe room and stood in the doorway, his wolf fully present in his eyes now, a terrifying golden ring around the grey irises. "Stay in here. Lock the door," Do not open it unless you hear my voice, and my voice alone." "Damon, don't go out there," Ivy begged, a sudden, overwhelming surge of fear for him washing over her. A mate's instinct. He looked back at her, and for a split second, the beast softened. "They came into my den to take what is mine," the Alpha King growled, baring his teeth in a humorless smile. "I'm going to teach them why I have no heart." He slammed the steel door shut, sealing her inside, just as the sound of automatic gunfire erupted in the hallway. The panic room was a masterpiece of paranoia. The walls were reinforced titanium, the air was independently filtered, and a bank of high-definition monitors covered the north wall, displaying every angle of the penthouse. Ivy Caldwell stood trembling in the center of the room, her eyes glued to the screens. The audio feed was live. She could hear the sickening crunch of bone and the wet tear of flesh. On the screen labeled Living Area, Damon Blackwood was a blur of violence. He hadn't fully shifted. There wasn't room amidst the furniture, but he was halfway there. His canines had elongated into razor-sharp daggers. His claws were tearing through the tactical vests of the intruders like wet paper, and his eyes were glowing a radioactive gold. There were 6 attackers. They weren't ordinary pack enforcers sent by a rival Alpha. These men moved with military precision. They wore unmarked black combat gear, gas masks, and carried submachine guns loaded with silver nitrate bullets, rounds designed to burn a wolf from the inside out. They're professionals, Ivy realized, clutching the heavy pistol Damon had given her. Assassins. On the screen, a soldier flanked Damon, raising a shotgun. "Damon, behind you!" Ivy screamed at the monitor, forgetting the soundproofing meant he couldn't hear her. But Damon didn't need a warning. He sensed the air shift. He dropped low, sweeping the leg of the man in front of him, then spun with impossible speed. He caught the shotgun barrel with his bare hand just as it fired. The blast shredded his palm, but he didn't flinch. With a roar that shook the camera feed, he yanked the weapon away and drove the stock into the assassin's helmet, shattering the visor and the skull beneath it. But there were too many of them. 2 more repelled through the broken skylight, landing on the marble island in the kitchen. They threw canisters, flashbangs. Boom. The camera feed whitewashed for a second. When the image returned, Damon was on his knees, shaking his head, disoriented. The soldiers moved in, electric cattle prods crackling with voltage high enough to stop a heart. They jammed the prods into Damon's neck and ribs. Damon convulsed, a guttural roar of pain tearing from his throat. Inside the panic room, Ivy felt the pain as if it were her own. A searing, white-hot agony spiked in her chest. The mate bond. It was fully open now, a conduit of raw sensation. "Stop it!" she shrieked, dropping the gun and clutching her head. "Stop hurting him!" Something inside her snapped. The binding spell that had kept her wolf dormant for 19 years, weakened by Damon's proximity, finally shattered under the pressure of her mate's distress. It didn't manifest as a shift. She didn't grow fur or claws. Instead, a wave of invisible pressure exploded from her body. It hit the panic room door, a solid slab of steel locked by a complex algorithm. The door didn't unlock. It warped. The hinges screamed as the metal buckled outward, blown open by sheer telekinetic force. Ivy stumbled out of the panic room, gasping for air. Her vision was tinted red. She wasn't thinking. She was reacting. She ran into the living room. The soldiers had Damon pinned, zip-tying his wrists with silver-laced cuffs. "Get away from him!" Ivy screamed. The soldiers turned, laughing behind their gas masks. "Target acquired," one of them said, his voice distorted electronically. "Secure the Omega. Vane pays double if she's alive." The leader stepped toward Ivy, reaching for her arm. Ivy didn't run. She looked him in the eye, and for the first time in her life, she didn't feel fear. She felt power. I said, she whispered, her voice echoing with a strange, harmonic distortion. Back. Down. It was a command, but not an alpha command, which compelled obedience through dominance. This was something ancient, a silver moon command. It attacked the mind directly. The soldier froze. He grabbed his head, screaming as if a migraine had just split his skull. He fell to his knees, nose bleeding profusely. The distraction was all Damon needed. The Alpha King roared, snapping the silver zip ties with a burst of hysterical strength. He lunged. It was over in 10 seconds. Damon didn't hold back. He was a whirlwind of claws and teeth. He tore through the remaining 3 men with a brutality that made Ivy look away. When silence finally fell, the penthouse was a ruin. Blood soaked the white carpets. The expensive art was shredded. Damon stood in the center of the carnage, chest heaving. His shirt was in tatters. He was bleeding from a dozen wounds. Gunshots, burns, cuts. He turned slowly to face Ivy. The gold in his eyes was fading back to storm grey, but the shock was evident. "Ivy!" he rasped, stumbling toward her. "What did you just do?" "I don't know," she whispered, her knees giving out as the adrenaline crashed. Damon caught her before she hit the floor. He winced as he held her. His left shoulder was a mess of hamburger meat from a shotgun graze. "We have to move," Damon said, his voice tight with pain. "Vane sent a kill squad. If they failed, the second wave will be heavier. They'll blow the building." "Where can we go?" Ivy asked, looking at his wounds. "You need a hospital." "No hospital," Damon growled, dragging her toward the private stairwell that led to the roof helipad. "Hospitals have records. Records can be tracked. We're going dark." The helicopter ride was a blur of darkness and rain. Damon piloted the chopper himself, his movements stiff and mechanical as he fought off blood loss and the poison from the silver nitrate circulating in his veins. They flew east, away from the city lights, into the deep, unforgiving wilderness of the Cascade Mountains. They landed in a small clearing surrounded by towering pines. The wind whipped the snow around them. They were high enough in elevation that the rain had turned to ice. A small, rugged cabin sat nestled against a cliff face. It looked abandoned, but when Damon pressed his bloody palm against a scanner by the door, the lights flickered on inside. "Get inside," Damon ordered, shutting down the chopper. Ivy helped him into the cabin. It was sparse, a fireplace, a leather couch, a kitchenette, and a med bay that looked surprisingly high-tech for a log cabin. Damon collapsed onto the couch, groaning. His skin was turning a sickly shade of grey. "The silver," he muttered, ripping his shirt open. "It's in the shoulder wound. A fragment. It's stopping my healing factor." Ivy looked at the wound. It was black and oozing. The smell of burning flesh filled the room. "What do I do?" she asked, panic rising. "You have to cut it out," Damon said through gritted teeth. He pointed to the med kit on the wall. "Scalpel, forceps, alcohol." "I can't," Ivy said, shaking her head. "I'm a waitress, Damon, not a surgeon." "You are a silver moon wolf," Damon snarled, his eyes rolling back slightly. "You are strong. Do it or I die in an hour." Ivy swallowed her fear. She grabbed the kit. Her hands were shaking, but she forced them to steady. She poured whiskey over the scalpel and over Damon's shoulder. He didn't flinch. "This is going to hurt," she whispered. "Do it." The next 10 minutes were the longest of Ivy's life. She dug into the muscle of the man who had terrified her just days ago. She found the jagged shard of silver bullet lodged against his collarbone. When she pulled it out with the forceps, dropping it into a metal bowl with a clink, Damon let out a breath that was half scream, half relief. Ivy quickly stitched the wound and bandaged it. She cleaned the blood off his chest with a warm cloth. Damon had passed out from the pain. Ivy sat on the floor beside the couch, watching his chest rise and fall, holding his hand. She fell asleep there, her head resting on his stomach. She woke to the smell of brewing coffee and bacon. Sunlight was streaming through the windows, reflecting off the snow outside. Ivy sat up, stiff and sore. Damon was standing by the kitchenette stove. He was shirtless, wearing only low-slung sweatpants. The bandage was still on his shoulder, but he looked remarkably better. His colour had returned. The bruises on his ribs had already faded to yellow. He turned and looked at her. The coldness was gone. In its place was something intense and possessive. "Eat," he said, sliding a plate of eggs and bacon onto the wooden table. "You need your strength. The binding spell breaking takes a toll on the metabolism." Ivy sat down, realizing she was starving. She ate in silence for a few minutes, while Damon watched her, sipping a mug of black coffee. "Why me?" she asked suddenly, putting down her fork. "Why does my bloodline matter so much that people are sending hit squads?" Damon sat opposite her. He placed a hand on the table, palm up. The Silver Moon pack wasn't just a pack, he explained quietly. They were the keepers. In our world, the High Council dictates the laws. They decide who keeps territory, who trades, who lives or dies. But power corrupts. Decades ago, the Council began taking bribes from human corporations, allowing testing on shifters, allowing land grabs. He looked out the window at the pristine forest. The Silver Moon pack had a genetic ability, the psychic voice. You used it last night. You can command an alpha, Ivy. You can force the truth out of a liar. You are a living lie detector and a weapon that can override the hierarchy. Ivy's eyes widened. So the Council killed them? They feared them, Damon corrected. They wiped them out to maintain control. They thought they got everyone. Until now. He reached across the table and took her hand. His skin was hot against hers. "I didn't know who you were at first," he admitted. "But now, even if you weren't my mate, I would protect you. You are the only thing that can break the Council's tyranny." "I don't want to break anything," Ivy whispered. "I just want to be safe." "I will make you safe," Damon vowed. "I have resources they don't know about. I have an army loyal to me, not the Council. Marcus is rallying them now. He's meeting us here at noon with the extraction team." Ivy felt a knot of anxiety in her stomach. "Are you sure you can trust Marcus?" Damon frowned. "Marcus has been my beta since we were children. He took a bullet for me in Chicago. I trust him with my life." 12:00 p.m. The sound of engines cut through the silence of the mountains. Ivy and Damon stood on the porch of the cabin. Damon was armed with an assault rifle he had pulled from under the floorboards. Ivy held the pistol. 3 black SUVs crunched over the snow-packed access road, followed by a transport truck. "That's not the extraction team," Damon said, his voice dropping to a dangerous growl. "That's a convoy." The vehicles stopped. Doors opened. Marcus stepped out of the lead SUV. He looked immaculate in his suit, seemingly unfazed by the mountain cold. But he wasn't alone. Stepping out behind him was an older man with silver hair and a cane topped with a diamond wolf's head. He wore the crimson robes of the High Council. "Councilman Thorne," Damon hissed. He raised his rifle, aiming it at his best friend's chest. "Marcus, what have you done?" Marcus didn't look ashamed. He looked sad. He raised his hands. "I'm sorry, Damon," Marcus called out, his voice echoing off the cliffs. "You were going to start a war for a girl. You were going to destroy everything we built. I couldn't let you do it." Councilman Thorne stepped forward, smiling a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Alpha Blackwood," Thorne said, his voice smooth as oil. "Put down the weapon. You are charged with harboring a Class A fugitive. Surrender the girl and you keep your crown. Refuse, and you die with her. Behind the vehicles, 50 soldiers in council crimson armor stepped out, weapons raised. Damon didn't lower his rifle. He stepped in front of Ivy, shielding her completely with his body. "Ivy," he said softly, not looking back. "Do you trust me?" "Yes," she whispered, terrified. "Good," Damon said, "because we're not surrendering." He reached into his pocket and pressed a small detonator. Click. The ground beneath the convoy didn't explode. Instead, the charges Damon had planted in the tree line years ago for this exact scenario, a siege, detonated. Massive pine trees, tons of timber and snow, came crashing down onto the road behind the convoy, blocking their retreat. Simultaneously, a second explosion rocked the cliff face above the cabin, causing an avalanche of snow to begin sliding toward the soldiers. "Run!" Damon yelled, grabbing Ivy's hand. They didn't run toward the road. They ran toward the cliff edge behind the cabin, a sheer drop of 300 feet into the icy river below. "Damon, we can't!" Ivy screamed as he dragged her to the edge. "Wolves survive the fall," Damon shouted over the roar of the avalanche and the gunfire erupting behind them. "Humans don't. Shift, Ivy. You have to shift now. I can't. Jump!" He pulled her over the edge. As they fell through the freezing air, gravity taking hold, Damon pulled her into his chest. And in that moment of pure, instinctual terror, Ivy felt the final lock break. Her bones cracked, her body contorted. Mid-air, falling toward the white water, the girl disappeared. In her place, a magnificent, snow-white wolf with eyes like violet stars burst forth. She was smaller than Damon, but radiant with power. They hit the water together. The freezing current of the Snake River was a violent, thrashing beast, but the white wolf was stronger. Ivy kicked her powerful hind legs, fighting the undertow that threatened to drag Damon's unconscious body into the depths. She was no longer the frail girl scrubbing floors. The shift had rewritten her biology. Her muscles were steel cables, her lungs were vast bellows. She bit down on the scruff of Damon's massive black wolf form. He had shifted instinctively upon hitting the water, but the impact and his injuries had left him dazed and dragged him toward the rocky bank. They washed ashore 3 miles downstream, collapsing onto the frozen mud. Ivy shifted back first. The change was agonizing, bones snapping back into human alignment, but she ignored the pain. She crawled over to Damon. He was shivering violently, his black fur matted with ice and blood. "Damon," she choked out, her hands freezing as she pressed them against his flank. "Come back. You have to shift back." He didn't move. The silver poisoning was still in his system, weakened but present, and the hypothermia was setting in. Ivy laid her head on his chest. She closed her eyes and reached for that strange new well of power inside her, the Silver Moon legacy. She didn't push it outward this time. She pushed it inward, through the mate bond. "Live," she commanded silently. "I command you to live." A golden pulse of energy flared between them. Damon gasped, his wolf form shuddering. Slowly, painfully, the black fur receded. The bones cracked and reformed. Moments later, Damon Blackwood lay naked and gasping on the riverbank, his skin pale but his heart beating strong. He opened his eyes. They were no longer just grey. They were flecked with the same violet light that shone in Ivy's eyes. The bond had deepened. They shared a soul now. "You saved me," he rasped, reaching up to touch her face. "You jumped off a cliff for me," Ivy countered, a fierce smile touching her lips. "I figured we were even." Damon sat up, looking around the desolate canyon. "Marcus thinks we're dead. Thorn will declare the throne vacant. By tomorrow morning, the Council will have seized Blackwood Enterprises and the West Coast Pack. Then we have until tomorrow morning," Ivy said, her voice hard. Damon looked at her. surprised by the steel in her tone. To do what? Run? No. Ivy stood up, ignoring the cold wind biting at her skin. She felt ancient and unstoppable. To take it all back. The resurrection. It was 9 a.m. the next morning when the doors of the Grand Council chamber in downtown Seattle opened. The room was filled with the elite, pack alphas from across the state, business tycoons, and at the head of the table, Councilman Thorne. Sitting to his right, looking like a ghost, was Marcus. It is a tragedy, Thorne was saying, his voice oozing false sympathy. Alpha Blackwood's mental state had deteriorated. He was harboring a dangerous fugitive. Their deaths in the Cascades, while unfortunate, were necessary for the stability of the region. As per council law, the assets of the Blackwood line are now forfeit to the state. Objection, a voice rang out. It wasn't a shout. It was a calm, resonant word that cut through the room like a blade. The double doors at the back of the chamber didn't just open, they were blasted off their hinges. Damon Blackwood strode in. He wore a torn black t-shirt and jeans stolen from a clothesline near the river, but he looked more regal than any man in a suit. He was flanked by a dozen massive wolves, not humans, but wolves in their shifted form. They were the rogues, the outcasts Ivy had called to them in the forest during the trek back, and walking beside him was Ivy. She wore a simple, oversized hoodie, but her eyes were glowing with a visible violet light. The air pressure in the room dropped. Every alpha in the room felt the instinctive urge to bare their throats. "Damon," Marcus whispered, standing up, his face draining of color. "You're impossible." "Sit down, traitor," Damon growled. Thorne slammed his hand on the table. "Guards, seize them. They are dead legally. Kill them on sight." The council guards, 20 armed men in tactical gear, raised their weapons. "No." Ivy spoke. It was the Silver Moon voice. It amplified in the acoustically designed chamber, hitting the soldiers with the force of a physical blow. The weapons clattered to the floor. The guards fell to their knees, clutching their heads, unable to disobey the absolute authority in her tone. Ivy walked forward, the sea of terrified alphas parting for her. She stopped at the foot of the table, looking up at Thorne. "You slaughtered my family," Ivy said, her voice calm but terrifying. "You killed the Silver Moon Pack because you were afraid of what I could do. You were right to be afraid." Thorne was trembling. He looked at Damon. "Control your mate, Blackwood. She's a monster." "She is my queen," Damon said, stepping up beside her. "And you are sitting in her chair." Thorne panicked. He pulled a concealed pistol from his robes and leveled it at Ivy's heart. He never pulled the trigger. Marcus moved. In a blur of motion, the beta threw himself across the table, shifting mid-air. His jaws clamped around Thorne's arm, severing the hand holding the gun. Thorne screamed, falling back. Marcus shifted back to human form, spitting blood onto the floor. He looked at Damon, tears in his eyes. "I didn't know," Marcus gasped. "Thorne told me. He told me the Silver Moon bloodline was cursed, that she would drive you insane and destroy the pack. He threatened to nuke the city if I didn't help him. I thought I was saving you." Damon looked down at his oldest friend. The betrayal still stung, but he saw the remorse. "You made a choice, Marcus," Damon said coldly, "and now you have to live with it. You are Beta no longer. You are Omega. You will serve the pack from the bottom. Leave my sight." Marcus bowed his head, accepting the mercy of life, and slunk away. Damon turned his attention to the room. He looked at the cowering alphas, the corrupt businessmen, the trembling council members. "The council is dissolved," Damon announced, his voice booming. From this day forward, the West Coast is under the protection of the Blackwood Pack and the Silver Moon lineage. Anyone who opposes this can challenge me now." Silence. Absolute, terrified silence. Then slowly, the Alpha of the Eastern Pack stood up. He looked at Ivy, then at Damon. He bowed deep and low. "Long live the king," he murmured. One by one, the room followed. "Long live the king, long live the queen." The first snow, 3 months later. The renovations on the Blackwood Tower were complete. The cold, sterile steel was gone, replaced by warmer woods, soft rugs, and life. Ivy stood on the balcony, watching the first snow of December fall over Seattle. She wasn't wearing a uniform. She wore a silk gown of deep emerald green. Her hand rested absently on her stomach. Damon stepped up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. He buried his face in her neck, inhaling the scent that still drove him mad, rain and ozone, but now mixed with something new. Something sweet. Milk and honey. The doctor confirmed it. Damon whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Triplets," Ivy laughed, leaning back into him. "I'm going to be the size of a house." "You will be beautiful," Damon promised, turning her around to kiss her. "You are the girl who scrubbed floors and brought a king to his knees. You can handle 3 pups." Ivy looked out at the city. It was the same city that had chewed her up and spit her out. But it didn't look grey anymore. Under the snow, under the protection of the White Wolf and the Alpha King, it looked like a fresh start. "Damon." "Yes, my love." "I think we should buy Sal's diner." Damon chuckled, the sound rumbling in his chest. "Why? Do you miss the coffee?" "No." Ivy smiled, her violet eyes twinkling. "But Mr. Henderson needs a new boss, and I think he's overdue for a performance review." Damon kissed her forehead, pulling her close as the snow fell around them, sealing their promise of forever. The cold king had found his fire, and the rejected girl had found her crown. And that, my friends, is why you never judge a book by its cover, or a waitress by her apron. Ivy went from scrubbing floors to ruling the entire West Coast, and Damon finally got the heart he claimed he didn't have. But wait. Triplets. Do you think their kids will have the Silver Moon powers, too? That sounds like a whole new chaos waiting to happen. If you enjoyed this roller coaster of betrayal, magic, and romance, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And if you haven't already, hit subscribe and ring the bell so you don't miss our next story. I'm working on a new one about a mafia boss who falls for the daughter of his enemy. You won't want to miss that. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.